Hello viewers, and welcome to this edition of Global Vibes, a show that feels the pulse of the global community in Thunder Bay. And today my guest is Serena Dykstra, who is a faculty member at the Confederation College. Hello Serena, and welcome to our studios, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Roopa.
So Serena, today you're going to raise my awareness on microaggression.
Yeah.
So let's start at the very beginning. Tell me what you do at the college. What is the area of your academic expertise?
So currently I'm a professor and program coordinator for Aboriginal Community Advocacy. It's a program, diploma program at Confederation College. Okay. So I teach as well as do some other administrative things related to the program.
Okay. But and you also were looking into the Human Rights and Equity Office.
Yeah, so that's how, that was my first job at Confederation College. I was hired as the Equity and Human Rights Advisor back in 2019.
Yeah. Oh, 2019. Yeah. Okay, and now you've moved on to teaching and administrative positions. Yeah. So tell me, what is microaggression and why does it matter?
So I first began exploring microaggressions in the role that I had previously, Equity and Human Rights, and part of that role was doing some PD, professional development workshops for employees. And microaggressions is not a topic that many people were aware of, and even myself, I had a lot to learn about that topic. But essentially, it is a slight, it could be a look, it could be a gesture, some type of behavior that signals unwelcome behavior. So when you think of racism, for instance, I could make a very derogatory racial slur towards somebody and it would be fairly obvious what that is. But if I were to, let's say a person of color got on the bus, I'm riding a public transit bus, and when they go to sit down beside me, I clutch my purse or my bag. I haven't said anything, but I've indicated, yeah. So it can be a variety of those types of behaviors.
Non-verbal expressions, tones, any of those?
Yeah, it can also be verbal as well. So making a comment about, wow, I can't believe that you got hired in this role. Like, you know, what would that signal to you if I'm making a statement like that to you? Yeah, so they're not overt, but they still signal some type of aggression. And I don't really like the term micro. Yeah, micro, because it's still aggression to me, right? It's still signaling that I don't think that you are deserving of some position, or I'm expressing some kind of discomfort with your appearance or making a judgment about you as an individual.
So there is a bias, or there is you're thinking of biases. You're thinking of, I understand. Okay, where does microaggression sit in the broad scheme of things, or broad social justice, for example?
So, social justice, it's very important. There are many people working in the area of social justice, advocacy, education, and these are areas where microaggressions frequently not only come up, but we try to grapple with what they mean and how to combat them, usually by raising awareness. So part of my role in the college and teaching it, as I talk to my students about it, it might be something as simple as having a conversation about group norms or expected behaviors at the beginning of a semester. But it can also be in other advocacy work as well. And I do other types of advocacy in my personal life as well as professional.
And would you say that is it an approach, or is it a concept? When you talk of microaggression, when you're talking to someone and explaining microaggression, how do you approach the topic?
Well, it's a concept, of course. The very thing of a microaggression is a concept, but we can also talk about approaches to deal with microaggressions, because that's usually the question people are trying to answer when we talk about microaggressions is, well, that's happened to me. I didn't even realize there was a name for this thing. So how do I combat it, or what could I do next time? Or I've seen it happen to somebody else. How can I be a supportive person in the event that it happens again?
Within your role, within the role that you're playing now or previously, have people come to you and said, you know, this has happened to me? And do they ask for, you know, putting a definition to it, or asking for explanation, or how to address it?
So in my previous role, it did come up a lot. So
Okay.
part of my role as Equity and Human Rights Advisor was to conduct investigations, sometimes very formal, long drawn out. Sometimes it was just a matter of having a conversation between two disputing parties. And I never had anybody come to me and say, somebody has committed a microaggression to me. And most of the time, we don't really have a name for it. They just know that they were offended, or they felt slighted, they felt excluded, or centered out because of who they are. So usually that would be how it would come up in my previous role. Today, in my role as professor, sometimes it will come up from students, but we have other resources at the college, somebody who's in my previous role that deals with those as well. But I try to keep a lookout for those things, because I try to create an atmosphere of safety, an atmosphere where people feel comfortable to speak in the classroom.
Safe space.
Yeah.
For one and all. And are there a variety of microaggression?
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned a couple of them earlier, that it might just be a behavior. So, you know, I'm clutching my bag or my belongings when somebody sits next to me. It could be a glance or a look that signals to you that there's something off. Sometimes it's a comment. So I've personally experienced, you know, I have short hair. Sometimes I've entered a washroom designated women's, and I've received everything from a weird glance to a comment that, oh, don't you know this is the women's washroom? Or I think you're in the wrong washroom.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so sometimes it's an actual statement. And so they're not making a statement towards me like, oh, you look like a man, or you look like you don't belong. They're trying to come across as polite, or whoops, I think you made a mistake, I'm just trying to help you. But it comes across as hurtful. And sometimes it can be a matter of passing somebody up for an opportunity because of who they are.
So very prevalent in workplaces and in workforce developments.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned about personal, in your personal life. You gave us an example of how you've been, you know, pointedly told about a washroom thing. Is there any other example that you would like to share? I was recently told in a workshop that it was something like, did you learn to speak English after you moved here in Canada?
Mm-hmm.
So I had to explain where I came from and how we also had colonial, you know, system. And so we learned English from day one from our school.
Right. So that comment, of course, is a microaggression. They're not saying something overtly racist, but making an assumption about that English is not your first language, and whether it is or it isn't is not the relevant part. It's that they felt the need to make a comment. Other examples that haven't happened to me, but I've had people of color where I've witnessed somebody feeling the right to touch someone's hair without asking, or asking, no, but where are you really from? Not believing that a person of color, or maybe a person that doesn't look like they are Canadian, could not possibly be from here, even if, or you speak really well. Where did you learn to speak like that? Things like that. So I have not personally experienced those types of microaggressions. Usually it was related to my appearance, but certainly I've witnessed them.
Thank you, Serena. We will take a very short break. Dear viewers, stay back. These are very important discussions, and it's good to learn about these, yeah? Just to be aware about these topics that we're discussing. So we'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers. You're watching Global Vibes, and with me is Serena Dykstra, a faculty member from the Confederation College, and we're talking about microaggression. I've heard about this term being used, but I wanted to learn a little bit more about it. So thank you so much, Serena.
You're welcome.
What is the impact when it's sometimes very unintentional, right? They don't mean it. It's offhand, and you brush it off, either with a smile and you say, "Oh, that's okay," and you make a lot of explanation. But like you said, it does hurt, yeah? It kind of lingers with you when you think about it, you're reflective. So what exactly is the impact of all of this, of microaggression?
Well, the impact, of course, is harm. You're harming somebody. And you're right. In many instances, I think people would argue that, oh, I didn't even know I committed a microaggression. I didn't know that making a comment like that or making an assumption was potentially harmful. And over time, though, if somebody receives microaggression after microaggression over time, it starts to really weigh on a person's psyche, on their sense of identity, and it can result in all kinds of behaviors in response: withdrawal from certain friend groups or work groups, not speaking up in class, feeling excluded, resentment, and sometimes hostility from the person who has received a microaggression, but then that hostility is often not understood. So when somebody speaks out or gets angry because it's been the final straw, and then the person's like, whoa, 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 like now they're putting that person or viewing that person as the problem, even though the person who's being hostile was actually harmed in the first place.
Sometimes my way of dealing with it is, yes, laugh it off, brush it off, don't take it seriously. But sometimes I feel that, is it my responsibility to raise awareness, to tell them, more about why this hurts or why this should not be said? Whose responsibility is it?
That's a really good question. So I too have certainly taken the avoidance approach. I think that it's context dependent. Sometimes you might not feel safe to respond. Sometimes you might just be tired. I've been dealing with this all my life. I don't have time for this. And so whose responsibility is it? Well, certainly the person committing the microaggression is responsible on some level, but if they are somebody, like we mentioned earlier, who might not have even realized that they committed a microaggression, how will they know? And so a lot of people who have been oppressed in some way, many people part of Indigenous communities, people of color, immigrant communities, different language groups are tired because the workload is disproportionately shifted onto those people to be the ones to raise the issue. And so, I have many different identities. I am Indigenous, I am female, I have had certain other types of oppression happen to me. I'm part of the LGBTQ community, and so it can be exhausting because these groups have historically been so oppressed. I would say if you feel safe enough to do so, absolutely raise the issue. It's not an easy conversation to have. Sometimes I like to just politely make a comment like that actually hurt my feelings, and sometimes it can actually feel safer to do it if it's a friend, but sometimes not.
And they're all wonderful people. It's just sometimes I feel it's a little bit of ignorance, if I may say so.
Sure, yeah, ignorance definitely plays a part.
It's all well-meaning, but at the same time unintentionally you say something which is not well received.
Yeah, well, and I think things like this and talking about it in a more public way definitely helps raise awareness. And the hope is that somebody watching this may say, oh my goodness, I've maybe done this before. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that that person needs to go into, curl into a ball and feel a lot of shame about that, because
No, just
even
being sensitive, yeah.
I've committed microaggressions. Just because it's happened to me doesn't mean that I haven't made an assumption about somebody unintentionally. I think that
Assumption, that's the word, yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just assume things, right? And then you make those kind of statements.
Sure. And then being able to, if I'm unable to make an apology, just being able to do better in the future, for sure.
Another word which I've been hearing lately a lot, intersectionality. What does that mean?
So
What does it entail?
intersectionality involves just what I mentioned. So I have intersecting identities.
Okay.
So I am female, I am Indigenous, I am LGBTQ. Somebody else might be Black, female, trans, whatever
N
it
number
is.
of comments. Yeah, okay.
So usually to do with those marginalized communities or equity deserving groups. And the reason why intersectionality is important when we talk about microaggressions is because that onslaught that happens to somebody who usually receives multiple microaggressions in their lifetime can feel very overwhelming for people with intersecting identities, because you're not just getting it from one direction.
Okay, I get
it's
that.
coming at a whole different, it's coming at a whole bunch of different facets of your identity. The other reason why it's important is because sometimes people with those identities can also harm you. So you and I are both women, but I don't know if you identify as cisgender. I'm certainly cisgender, so the gender I was born with is the gender I identify with.
Correct.
But let's say we both are, for the sake of argument, but we're clearly not from the same culture. But I might say, well, Roopa, I understand what it's like to be part of your culture, or I understand what you're going through because we're both female. Right? The two don't line up.
Exactly.
Yeah. So sometimes the harm can come from those types of intersecting identities as well.
You did mention that, the different kinds of impact you may have. Would you put a dollar figure or a cost to this impact? Like mental health issues. Yeah, like
thousands, millions. I don't.
Really?
I mean,
wow.
Our mental health is so connected to the physical.
Exactly.
And I'm not a doctor.
No, of course,
I'm certainly not an expert in the medical field, but I anecdotally know from my own experience.
Yeah, exactly. From an impact point of view, I mean, how much it affects, why we need to recognize this is what I'm getting at.
And workplaces are recognizing it too, the importance of good mental health. Sometimes it's a matter of just getting proper sleep, but if something's bothering you and it's affecting your sleep and then it affects other aspects of your physical health, those two are most certainly connected.
Wow, so many things to think about. I mean, you've just talked about one, which is, you could say, an approach or a concept, but there's so many layers and layers of, reflections and sensitivities that one need to address this. And this is what we want to learn from you, Serena, in our next segment. So stay with us, dear viewers. We'll be right back after a very short break. Hello viewers, and welcome back to Global Vibes. Serena is talking to us about microaggression, intersectionality, and we did speak about what it is, what is microaggression. We spoke about the impact it makes on anyone from the receiver's point of view. We also spoke about, you gave us a lot of brilliant examples in workplace as well as in your personal life. Now, how do we address microaggression? We have recognized there is microaggression. How do we address it proactively, constructively? How do we address microaggression?
Yeah, so I think referring back to what I said earlier, education, certainly, if you're able to attend a workshop, organizations certainly have a role to play there as well in educating employees or providing those opportunities to have those conversations. People in positions of power like myself who have groups of students coming through and being able to create those safe spaces in the classroom. But if it's happening to you on an individual level, certainly it's not always easy. And both you and I acknowledge that sometimes avoidance is kind of the default response. And I don't know that it's always the same response in every situation. But calling it out. You know, you don't have to say, I think you've committed a microaggression against me. You know, that might lead to some more confusion.
No, explaining and why it affects,
Even just something as simple as that, you know, that really hurt my feelings, or what do you mean by that is a really great, really great question. So if somebody makes a comment about like, wow, I can't believe that you were the one that got hired here. Like, it's such a vague question, right? But you kind of get what they're trying to say. So asking somebody, well, what do you mean by that?
Or you look good in print. I mean, your resume looks good in print. And then they leave it offhand. And then you're wondering, you're confused as to what is the person trying to say.
Yeah.
Right?
And so it forces the person committing that microaggression to really reflect, or to kind of point out to them that what they're saying is kind of problematic.
Yeah.
So calling it out in various ways. What do you mean by that?
Open a conversation, perhaps, if you feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah, and sometimes there's emotions involved. I would say many times there's probably emotions involved, anything from frustration to anger to sadness to fear. And so you may have to take some space for yourself to deal with those emotions and come back to that conversation later. And it's perfectly fine not to address a microaggression in the moment. Sometimes you feel too heated. And so you might walk away and leave it be, but you might go back to that person later, especially if you have a relationship. Usually it would be more appropriate in the workplace or a friend, and say, you know, the other day when you said that, this really made me feel this way, or what did you mean by that? Yeah.
I have, many a times I have, when I'm not able to get the name or a surname right, I've started saying it's a very unique name, and I don't know how to pronounce it. Can you help me learn to get your name correctly? Is that a good approach? Is that a good way to ask?
Certainly it's all right to ask somebody how to pronounce their name if you're meeting them for the first time, but be careful, because especially if it's a language that may be foreign, over time you want to be practicing that name so that you don't have to keep asking them 10 times over, because the first time might be received very nicely. Sure, I can tell you how to pronounce my name, but that by the 10th time I might be saying, Roopa, I've told you already how to do this. Yeah.
You'd also mentioned, Serena, that self-reflection plays a very big role.
Yeah, so the person committing the microaggression, so if somebody realizes later, oh my goodness, I've maybe done this before, certainly good to reflect on our own selves, read about it. The internet is a vast resource. There are articles on microaggression, there's workshops, there's trainings that people can attend, or even talking to your organization about having some type of educational workshop.
One of the things that you were mentioning is responding to microaggression. You did say asking clarifying questions. Yeah? You open the discussions, you open the dialogue, and you ask for clarification. You also said curiosity and not judgment, being judgmental. So you're curious about someone and you want to know more about that person. That's another action point, or something to open a discussion with. perhaps, yeah?
Well, and curiosity can also be used to respond to a microaggression. I'm really curious why you think that.
Yeah.
I myself have grown up, kids pick up things, right? And things that are said around the schoolyard that you later as an adult realize are highly problematic or outright racist.
Yeah, this happens a lot, yeah? You think of what had happened in your school time or when you were a child.
And sometimes you might not have even realized what those things actually
Correct.
meant, but you were just saying them or hearing them. But because you didn't ask what they meant, and nobody wants to look foolish when they're a teenager, so you might not ask and then later realize, what, that phrase might have been a little problematic.
Another item, another action point could be own your thoughts and feelings. What exactly would that mean?
So when you have some feelings about a microaggression, it can be very tempting to want to lash out. And of course, that's certainly a response. But is it going to result in a productive conversation? If you're the person getting feedback that, what something you said hurt somebody, owning your own feelings and not putting it back on the person, because that can sometimes happen. So I've said something racist to you and you have told me, you know what, I think that hurt my feelings, or that was a little bit racist, and I will all of a sudden break down crying, and then you'll start feeling bad because I roped you into my problems instead of actually addressing the main concern.
And sometimes it's, you can consider separating the person from the action or the behavior. Is that possible?
Yeah, so not making it a personal attack, because nobody likes to feel personally attacked, of course, but trying to separate it as much about, okay, that's a problematic behavior, and it can maybe work if you know the person. Like, I know you, I know that you don't actually believe this about me, but listen to what you're saying and how it's coming across.
And humor. Sometimes humor
can diffuse. It
can diffuse that tension, right?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you so much, Serena. This was a big, I learned a lot from talking to you, and I hope the same for my viewers as well. Thank you so much for talking to us. These are uncomfortable discussions, topics, and we are having new terminologies coming up every day, but it's good to be aware. It takes some responsibility and educate ourselves as well. So thank you so much, Serena, for doing that for us.
Thank you, Roopa.
Thank you, viewers, for listening to Serena and me having a discussion on microaggression. Till we meet again, it's goodbye from Global Vibes. Take good care of yourself. Thank you.